Francis Levy. Ed Mercessi and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center. So welcome to Love Code, the Chemistry of Intimacy, which is the third of our series of roundtables entitled Sextet on Sexuality. We started with mating and captivity. Last week was the biology of sexuality, so it's appropriate that this week is the chemistry of intimacy, which segues right from that particular topic. So the art you see on the walls here is from an exhibit that's been curated by Hallie Cohn, who's chairman of the art department at Marymount Manhattan College, in league with Adam Ludwig on our staff, and it's called The Body as Image. And it is a literal and figurative accompaniment to the whole series, Sextet, in which the artists exhibit perverse and diverse representations, as you'll see, of sexuality. And I'm calling your attention to it because of the fact that people come into the center and there's so much going on in the center of the room that they often don't realize that these exhibits are curated and relate to our roundtables. So there are further, the exhibition continues in our annex, and there's writing on the wall, so you should take a look at it. Now, several weeks ago, Ed read an email from somebody in, I think, where was it from, Ed? In Poland, who was a follower of Philoctetes, and it was very inspiring. And so Sextet has bred its own series of emails, and I wanted to read you one in response to the announcements for these particular roundtables. It comes from Rosalind Thomas, and its subject is, "You have a minute to chat with me. Hi. I am a lonely, pretty girl who is looking for a chat with you. I am talkative and funny. I need you, maybe you in my future. Email me back at Rosalind, blah, 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 and I will reply back with some really nice pictures. And you will see that maybe I am your destiny." So I thought that's very promising in terms of the direction we're going in. So tomorrow, maybe you can help me with that.
Oh, no, I'm not the one. I'll send you. We'll find someone.
Okay. This is an activist program. So tomorrow, Living in the Musical Moment inaugurates its series. It's our series on improvisation and jazz, and Lewis Porter runs that particular series, and David King will be joining him. And the subject is percussion. Next Friday, October 3rd, Robert Brustein moderates a panel on Shakespeare, the man behind the plays. And next Saturday, Sextet continues with The Body and Its Image, in which you'll meet the burlesque dancer Julia Atlas Muz, M-U-Z, the performance artist Marina Abramovic, in the company, and they will be in the company of the psychiatrist Sandra Gilman from Emory, the behavioral neurologist Marcel Kinsborn, and Paul Campos, a professor of law at the University of Colorado, who addresses the legal and medical implications of all of you appearing at that particular roundtable. So anyway, please remember to silence all your cell phones. Books are, by the way, on sale by the participants in this roundtable, and so you can purchase them afterwards. And I wanted to remind everyone that all Philoctetes roundtables can be listened to by simply going to philoctetes.org and going to archive, and you can hear the past roundtables, and also we simulcast. And you can see them, you can hear them, and you can see them, and they are also simulcast, so that if you can't make a Philoctetes presentation, you can always go on to philoctetes.org, and that's what's playing on our site. Like right now, that's what people will see if they tune into philoctetes.org. I am now pleased to present Sue Carter. Sue Carter is professor of psychiatry and co-director of the Brain Body Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She has studied the endocrinology of love and other aspects of reproduction for more than 3 decades. She is the author of more than 200 scientific papers and editor of 5 volumes, including Attachment and Bonding, a New Synthesis. Dr. Carter was the first person to detect and define the physiology of monogamy. She is currently exploring the role of novel brain chemicals, including oxytocin, in stress management and early experience. Sue Carter will moderate this afternoon's roundtable and introduce our other distinguished guests. And I also have to mention that Sue Carter is conducting an experiment that Philoctetes is sponsoring on the subject of oxytocin. So maybe more about that in the course of the roundtable.
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, and thank you, you and Ed, both for sort of allowing this to happen and inviting me back. This is my second visit, and I, of course, say it wrong. Say it your way.
Philoctetes.
All together now. Philoctetes. Wow. I got it wrong all the time. All right. This is going to be a lot of fun, I hope. It's such a great day, and we're going to have to take ourselves out of the election, as much as I know we hate to. So I'm just going to say it right up front. Sarah Palin, okay, is not in our roundtable. But some other interesting people are. So, oh, yes, she's busy.
She could see it from her window.
Yeah, we can make jokes, though, but we are allowed, everybody's allowed at least one Sarah joke, if you'd like. So, kind ones, I hope. I want to start over here with Elaine Hatfield, who is really a person in this field that we're going to talk about today. She probably, more than any of the rest of us, sort of exemplifies the scholarship of this topic of love. She's written books like Love, you've got the background here, Love, Sex, and Intimacy. That sort of sums it up. She's professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii, past president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality, has received awards like Distinguished Scientist Awards for Lifetime Achievement from the Society for Experimental Social Psychology, the Society for the Scientific Study of Sex, the University of Hawaii itself. Two of her books have won the American Psychological Association National Media Award. This is a pretty big deal. And if you haven't read her books, I recommend them. They read like novels, but they are very, very grounded in reality, and we'll come to that later, the alternative ways of using sex. Let's see, I'll go over here next. Dolores Malaspina. Dolores is a friend of mine and the Steckler Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at New York University. She has been in most of her career at Columbia University, where she was professor of clinical psychiatry. She's published over 150 papers, was the first person to identify paternal germline changes, and by this is what's written here, but what it really means is that the age of the parent could determine the outcome or the incidence of things like schizophrenia and also autism. And this work, if you've been sort of listening to the scientific news, you know, for the last 2 years, this has been the hot topic in many aspects of science. She's involved with a very important long-term study based in Israel, in which they're following people they were born in what year?
66 to 74.
1966 to 74. So this is a lifelong study, a really amazing prospective study that perhaps she'll tell us a little bit about today. She's also received many awards. She's NIH-funded scientist with several NIH grants, awards from American Psychiatric Association, National Alliance for Research on Schizophrenia and Depression. And what I think Dolores is really probably best known for is mentoring young scientists and really getting people who are clinically oriented into research and allowing that to happen. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So we're extremely happy to have her here. And really Dolores' role today, in my mind, is to kind of ground us in medicine. Okay? And where do all these things that we're going to talk about intersect with medicine and specifically psychiatry? On my right is Stephanie Brown, and Stephanie, I want you all we're going to sing later, but today is Stephanie's 40th birthday. I hope I'm not embarrassing her. But she joined us in spite of that, brought her kids and her husband from Ann Arbor, where she's an assistant professor in the Department of Internal Medicine. Sort of an interesting place to be, given that she's really, I think, a evolutionary biologist, psychologist, something like that, right? She has a recent Career Development Award from the National Institutes of Mental Health, is a Junior Incentive Award from the National Science Foundation, and has done something quite extraordinary that I'm going to have her tell you about today, an extraordinary study. So I'm not going to anticipate that, but we'll come to it at some point because it deals with something that we're all interested in, and it's really, if you will, the applied aspects of love. This fellow on the right, Stephen Porges, I've got to be sure I say that name right, is the father of that person right there, okay? Yeah. I know this because I'm the mother of that person. I mean, it's a riddle, yes. So who is this person? Oh, no, he's not the speaker, this guy. Steve is my husband of 38 years. We actually met exactly 39 years ago this month, so it's kind of anniversary season for us, I think. Steve is the creator of something that is called the polyvagal theory and discoverer of the social engagement system. And you all say, well, I already knew that, right? But maybe you didn't. So we'll give you a chance later to understand how this works. But it's basically looking at how the heart is related or regulated by the brain and the brain by the heart and the whole body. He has been awarded a patent years ago for the methodology to describe neural regulation of the heart that's now used in over 150 labs, studying what some people call respiratory sinus arrhythmia or vagal tone. So if you hear the word vagal tone, you are actually hearing about Steve's work. It's become generic and people have forgotten where it comes from. He is the former chair of the Department of Human Development, and was director of the Institute for Child Study at the University of Maryland. He's past president of a very large group called the Federation of Behavioral, Psychological, and Social Sciences, former president of the Society for Psychophysiological Research, has published over 200 articles, edited 3 volumes, and as I've said, not only fathered this son, but another one. So isn't that amazing? We have 2 kids.
With the same person.
By the same person, even, yes. Well, it didn't have to be that way. But it worked out very nicely. And we forced Seth over there to come. Seth's an associate editor of Popular Mechanics. He lives here in the city, so that's why it's not that we take him along on all of our trips. Okay, now, or do we? We'd like to. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about love. But we're going to use love at many dimensions, and you who've been following this series are already really familiar with this idea. This is an extremely important construct. It underlies wars, societies, has all kinds of implications, and remains just as mysterious probably as the first time an equivalent word for it was used by the first human that could speak. So we're talking about a really old idea. It has a lot of different points of view, and we don't have a real tight organization today. I'm going to kind of let things flow, but I'm going to ask Elaine to start by kind of giving us a historical perspective, because she probably more than anyone on the planet really knows about the scientific study of love and where it's come from, and she has her own history. I think it wasn't mentioned here, but I believe you are a winner of another award, a very important one. May I mention it?
Oh, of course.
Of course. It was the Proxmire Golden Fleece Award for, what year was it? In the 70s, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so.
For the largest waste of federal funding that he could imagine, that many of you remember Proxmire. And his concern was that federal money, the National Science Foundation, was indeed funding research on love, God forbid. Now, it could have, maybe used a little more than we have, not less. But Elaine stuck in there, hung in there, and I'd like her to sort of address for us the first question, which is, what is love? So would you be willing to do that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
There are lots of typologies of love, but all around the world, people can pretty much distinguish between 2 things: passionate love and companionate love. Passionate love is that sort of desperate, you're just thinking and thinking and thinking all the time. And companionate love is like friendly, warm, trust, etc. And people know the difference between the 2. When you say to somebody, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, that's the kiss of death. That is not what anybody wants to hear. Yeah.
And so what we have to ask, one of the themes, let me say, that's going to go through our talk today is the concept of history and evolution. And I think that one of the questions, the second question I'd like to ask is, and again I'm going to start with Elaine, is when do you think this concept, as a human concept, came on the planet? We're going to debunk it soon enough, but let's...
Oh boy, is that an interesting question, because as the primatologists do research, they keep pushing back the differences between humans and other primates, and so most people talk about it as coming in with primates, but we really don't know, at all. But that is a very good question. I'll give you another paragraph just to tell you why we don't know that. When social psychologists started research on love, maybe 40 or 50 years ago, I tried to find everything that had been done on passionate love, and it was amazing how little there was. There was almost nothing. And it is so thrilling for me. Scientists always have this feeling, oh God, if I could just come back, in 300 years, just to see how the research came out and to answer all these questions we can't quite answer yet. Well, it feels like I got to live that long, because advances in technology and advances in theory mean that we've gone from knowing almost nothing, and we could sit around and just speculate on our basis of having 3 dates one time, down to now, when you guys are doing absolutely thrilling work, and all of a sudden everybody's interested in passionate love because of changes in technology. And so there are evolutionary psychologists working on it, biochemists, neuroscientists, and it feels like we're really making such advances that I can barely keep up. It is very exciting.
It's very exciting.
Elaine, can you, going back to the Greeks, because I thought I would find some of the answers going back and reading Greek myths, because there's several regarding love, and I was totally shocked by how they described love. What was your take on the Greek and even before concepts of love?
People, especially the cultural psychologists, are really divided as to how universal love is. When I was in graduate school, the anthropologists used to say it was a Western concept, and only in the West. There's a whole chapter in which all these Chinese psychologists, cultural people came in and said, we simply don't have passionate love in China. It just doesn't really exist. And there were these great jokes Americans made about how you had to be a moron to marry somebody on the basis of love when it was so fleeting. Well, the Greeks have always been an exception that people talk about, because some of them talked about love the way that we do. But most people think that it wasn't till in the West, about 1500, that the idea of love as a basis for marriage and something that was important really got going.
Well, I was actually shocked by the Greek myths, because many of them were defining love through loss. So
tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I can't remember the specific myths, but basically, if your spouse or your lover died and you committed suicide, it was a demonstration that you loved the person.
You think there'd be something short of that, wouldn't you?
Well, the issue is really exactly. It was never a prospective concept of love. The other one was predator love, where people would, gods would be in different shapes and then secure the individual that they thought was the nicest one, take that person away. It was basically total predator, making the person feel safe and comfortable, and then changing from a bull to a god. And then the other one that I remember was a person who didn't trust women, and he made a statue. And the statue was that of a perfect woman. He won, and he prayed, and he prayed, and he was rewarded by the statue. The statue of marble became a real woman. I think we've had movies about that, but it's certainly not an interaction. It's not knowing the features of the person. It's not a dialogue. It's not feeling, development of what we consider love. So I saw it as predator, basically a sex doll. Which, and actually I show videos from CNN where Reuters is one where a guy spends all his money buying these, if in Japan, buying these sex dolls because he can't trust real women.
Where we really need to go and research on sex, that we really haven't gone at all, are sexual motives. John Delamater started a tradition of saying there are really 3 motives for having sex: love, procreation, and recreation. And you think, oh, you've got to be kidding, because you've just named a historical perspective or an anthropological perspective. It means we can, in about 10 minutes, this audience could name 20 motives that people have for sex, for love, etc. And I was thinking as you were talking, an Iranian guy wrote to me and said he wanted to do some work on love because the great poets equate murder of women with love.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, I'm not the woman to talk about this with. You know, I really don't want to explore that notion. But it would be very good, because we're speculating about things like where is the center for passionate love and sexual desire. It's got to be affected also by cultural notions of, are you thinking of love and murder over here, or thinking of love and sex, or any of the notions that you've mentioned?
Well, I think, and actually I'm going to move on, but I think one of the problems has been that we tend to say the poets and the artists have gotten it right, and the scientists don't know what they're talking about. But you have to ask the question, when you start going back and looking at the poets, is predator love what we're talking about?
Yes,
is
absolutely.
grieving love what we're talking about? And it tends not to be really what we, as our culture, talk about love.
Yes.
So it's, and then the bit we were in the British Museum, and there is a whole set of pictures on something.
It's called the allegory of love.
Thank you, allegory of love, and it's all about deceit and trickery and all kinds of. It's and this was the 1500s that you're talking about, and it's all about putting the church between physical sexual activity and, quote, love. And so we start seeing that there's a whole culture there that's been used to manipulate biological drives or biological feelings. And I'm actually my major contribution to why I'm invited, not because I
Fathered the kid.
Not because of love.
No, this is purely intellectual.
It's purely intellectual. Well, what I used to say is that we met and we fell in love, and then 20 years later we met again in the brainstem and fell in love again, which is really where we start to learn that our research was crossing in the area of the brainstem, and we'll get a little later in that. But what I really want to say is that when we defer to the artists and the poets, we forget the culture, and this is really what you're bringing up. We forget who was paying the artist to paint. The church was paying the artists to paint and portraying these things, and who were paying the poets when the culture was part of a way of propaganda of the society. And what we need to understand is that we are biological in nature. We are biological beings, and we are also extraordinarily creative and intuitive individuals, or at least we evolved to. So our brains are very complicated and we develop self-emergent properties. We're actually extraordinarily creative. And the problem we have is that we try to take these complicated psychological constructs, and we want to reach back and down, and we want to come up with a simple biological formula. And we're facing it in the wrong direction. We want to start off with understanding our biology and start understanding how biological states promote a whole variety of psychological experiences. So we can have a physiological state that supports many psychological experiences. So it's a one-to-many. And what has happened with areas like affective neurosciences and cognitive neuroscience is that people are trying to go top-down, one-to-one. And it doesn't make any sense. I always like to talk about the inverted triangle. This is why I carry my glasses. See, it becomes an inverted triangle. And this is the brainstem. And this is where things come in and out of our brain. But this is our cortex. It's enormous, and it's creative. And as we
on the wall.
And as we develop, it's this part that is making new rules and new associations. This older part is this is what we get when we're born, and it's functioning.
But when you talk about older part, I think it's interesting, our idea of reaching back in human culture is to get to the Greeks and Romans. The processes and the emotions and the type of connections and passions and what they subserve has been wired into our evolution for millennia. Then we have that impacting on cultural needs and cultural constraints. So one of the other pieces of it is, does this come out of culture, or are different cultures simply trying to manage the power of passionate love, and some doing it better or worse than others?
I think it's brilliant, because, of course, it's the latter. Because the lower part, it's basically our neurobiological evolution. We come into the world with old stuff. We share with other primates and actually other mammals and even reptiles. But the cortex has this wonderful creative aspect that we try to manage these feelings, these states, and we create structures.
So then is love everywhere? Is there, so what's the end of passionate love? Where is it?
I can give a wonderful illustration of the point that you're making. The Museum of Natural History here has a diorama with Lucy, one of our oldest ancestors, and a man she's working with, and they have the skeleton of Lucy. Well, when the Leakeys first tried to figure out what was going on with those two, they had 72 footprints that led across a lava field, and so we know what was happening with Lucy and her mate, that they were walking along. But these were very weird footprints because they were canted in strange ways, and big steps and little steps. And so they assigned graduate students to step into the footprints and walk the way they were. And when they did that, the graduate students started giggling, because it's like when teenagers run across the beach, you know, and they go, ah, ah, ah. They were clearly two young people being very silly in what we probably think is a romantic and a sexual way. So our first found pre-ancestors are already acting a lot like adolescents.
Very nice. I have a question for Dolores, because I know that she's spent her whole career dealing with serious mental illness, and I know it's a little off. No, we're not quite there yet, but I want you to help me understand how a psychiatrist looks at love and the use of love in medicine.
Yes.
Or what happens to it when somebody gets sick? What happens?
Well, I absolutely need a disclaimer, because I am, of the last 25 years or so, a psychiatrist who does research. But at one point, as an undergraduate, I majored in environmental biology, and then had a graduate degree in zoology, all before becoming a psychiatrist and an epidemiologist. So for me, understanding very severe and persistent mental diseases, which are so compelling, certainly in autism or schizophrenia, there are such profound disturbances in mood and social capacity. They're very, very compelling compared to the way healthy people react. It puts it in a perspective. So as someone who then went to science to understand serious diseases, I find myself at the interface of having always known your work and Steve's work. Long before I knew Steve, I knew the polyvagal theory. And I would also say that during my training in psychiatry, one of my most wonderful analysts was mentoring me, actually supervising my long-term therapy case. And we got into a discussion of why schizophrenia was so overdiagnosed in this country several decades ago. And when they actually did a study comparing how frequently people were given a diagnosis of schizophrenia in New York compared to England, they found the same diagnoses by the respective psychiatrists at the same percentage. By which I mean it was just as common in England as it was in New York, but very overdiagnosed in New York. And as I was probing him on this, I said, well, how were you diagnosing it? And he was talking about the feel of the disease and using a sense of intuition that someone was just not resonating with the doctor, that there was a gap in that sense of emotional connectivity that our brains do. That our brains are able, once we give someone attention, to lock in. And the people who didn't do that with the doctors were then receiving this label of schizophrenia. Wow. And I thought that your work at the time was helping me to sort out. It wasn't schizophrenia that these old people were picking up on, but they were picking up on this quality where humans, you know, a therapist and a patient, or, you know, two people at a dinner party, where there was this failure of picking up the same emotional wave and following it together.
So they weren't engaging, really. They were.
Oh, that sounds so simple. But yes, I guess. I mean, there's engagement at so many different levels.
Right.
So certainly passionate love is one level of engagement. But I guess even in a shared conversation, something seemed to not be
But
there.
there is what I was calling the social engagement system, which is the heart-face connection,
Right.
which is the neural regulation of the muscle. We're going to talk very abstractly for a moment, or concretely, then go more to the abstracts. But the neural regulation of the face happens to be linked to the neural regulation of the heart. And this actually defines what I call a social engagement system. And this controls prosody or intonation in voice, it controls facial expressivity, it controls ingestive activity, and even controls muscles in our middle ear that enables us to hear human voice in noisy environments. And we'll recall when we met our respective significant others, we met them often in noisy environments when we were younger, and suddenly all we did was hear what they were saying. Nothing else could be heard. And that's because these muscles contract, and when they contract, they're also associated with the orbicularis and the opening of the eye, the orbit. The eyes open wide. We see this as a look of love, and they hear nothing in the background. But you can only do that in safe environments, because if you give up this hypervigilance of predator, you better be in a safe environment. So the body's always adjusting for risk. But the issue is the reciprocity of this and reciprocal behavior. So when we talk about autism, one of the features of autism is not contingent behavior, it's role reversals. Okay, so an autistic child can be highly reliable in terms of responding to a sequence, but will not take the lead and reverse the role. But a healthy relationship deals with role reversals. And our nervous system is detecting these features.
And to be sure, I don't want Stephanie left out here, and you'll see why it fits in at this point, because her studies are mainly of people as they age, and the relationship of that kind of reciprocity to good health. So I want you to tell us your story, Stephanie, because those of you who haven't heard this will find it, I think, very, very interesting. If you'll just sort of give us background.
Sure. So I come at this asking, sort of why. Why is it that we would have a social engagement system that's also linked to kind of regulation of our autonomic nervous system, really? Why is it that we experience love in the first place? If we're going to talk about passionate love versus companionate love, what is this dichotomy about? Why divide things up that way? Why, what adaptive problem really was solved for individuals across species who were capable of forming these bonds, capable of becoming connected to one another, capable of staying close to another individual with whom you're in love. And when I puzzled through this idea, I would say the traditional take on this question, although we don't research it very much, but the traditional take has been to assume that we feel love because we want to stay close to individuals who give us things, who give us lots of resources, or that we'll get more rewards and satisfactions in life than by being around somebody else than we'll get by going it alone. So essentially, people who could not feel this way would be isolated and from a group and would not survive and reproduce. People who could feel this way would be would maintain these relationships, would stay close to people who give them lots of benefits. So it's essentially an assumption that we're all selfish, that we do these things to get more rewards than we get otherwise. And when I puzzled through this assumption, it seemed problematic to me, because why do you need love? I mean, you can get you have these basic reinforcement systems in all organisms that allow them to stay close to things that are rewarding, and the special feeling that we're talking about, or this connection that we get with other people. I mean, there's something different about it. It's not as straightforward as just basic reinforcement, or maybe it is, and we can certainly discuss that. But it presupposes that people are out there just waiting to give things away, waiting to give away all their resources to all these people who fall in love with them. And so evolution would have had to at least select at the same time for something to allow you to suppress your self-interest when necessary so that you can promote the well-being of another individual. And if you think about it with a helpless infant, then it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, that helpless infant does not survive unless a parent is able to suppress its own immediate needs in favor of raising the helpless offspring. So I hypothesized that social bonds with others, what we call maybe unconditional love, evolved to get us to suppress self-interest when necessary so that we can reliably promote the well-being of another person. So that when we need to stay close to people that we love, that we're basically, we're doing that so that we can be around in case there's something that they need. And that the reason that there may be health implications of this system is that the neurobiology of the systems in the brain and hormones that have been linked to investment behavior, parental investment in giving behavior and helping behavior, even in humans, that these particular systems are associated with more restorative physiological processes. And so I have some studies that have looked at, how much giving people do and track them over time and see how long they live. And our studies show that people who are helping others actually live longer compared to people who do not help others, and that we also control for how much they get from their relationship partners. We control for how healthy they are to begin with. We rule out a lot of competing explanations for this effect. We continue to find that altruism, for lack of a better word, doing something that benefits another individual, appears to be good for your health.
Actually,
So it's not altruistic.
Right, exactly.
But I think there's an underlying there's a very important process here, and which is very much related to mental health, and that is people who can use other people to self-regulate versus those that cannot. So can I use another person to calm and feel comfortable, or does another person really agitate me? And when we start looking at various psychopathologies, like autism, this becomes one of the issues. And there are other psychiatric disorders that have this problem. So it's really, from a neurobiological one, can we use another person to help us calm down? And what are the neural mechanisms? And I think you're right on target. The neural mechanisms are when we see facial expressivity, does it trigger facial expressivity in us? So when we see the upper part of the face and we see people smiling, is this calming, or do we misinterpret that and see it as sarcasm and cynicism and get angry?
Alternatively, if we are biologically predisposed to be looking for the right social context or a passionate love, it means that we have that drive until we get such a person. And the calming down can be the fulfillment of the need to have someone.
But here's the trick, and this is really gets us back on theme, that our underlying physiological state determines whether or not we can actually perceive or respond to those cues. So if we're literally tachycardic or in a state of fight-flight, the neural regulation of the face, the ability to even pull out prosody and to actually identify the right emotions changes, because we're now in a state of hypervigilance. We're adaptively protecting ourselves and highly unlikely to find the mate.
I mean, I won't talk constantly, I promise. But so you're talking about two separate drives. We have a drive to pair bond, to be close, to be intimate. We have another one to protect ourselves under danger, and we have to know when to engage one versus the other.
Absolutely. We have to pick up the cues of what is safe. And actually, when I said Sue and I got reacquainted in the brainstem 20 years later, is that we realized that we were studying two different aspects of the relationship, of the social relationship. I was interested in what makes people feel safe with one another. So what are the features that enable engagement, so social engagement? What's the proxy for being able to come close to another person? And Sue was interested in these permanent bonds. It was just like a male-female distinction in an agenda. Okay, so where the male is always interested, how can I get closer? The woman was always saying, how can we stay close forever? And so Sue's work with oxytocin was about securing the bond, and mine was saying, how can we get closer? And the interesting part was that if you reverse it, This is where you try to create bonds or release certain neurochemistry chemicals that create a bonding, and you don't like the person, you're not safe with the person, you have pathological relationships. You have really dangerous situations. And if you understand that you want to like the person before you want to passionately love the person, because if you make the mistake and passionately love someone that you don't like, it's chaos. It's damn.
I think it happens a lot.
It happens a lot.
People I often tell when I'm teaching students about what will eventually come to oxytocin. There is some chemistry here for those of you who are wondering when that's happening. You want to be careful who you release these chemicals with that do cause social bonds. And especially teenagers, I think, their bodies are releasing these, they truly are having experiences of raging hormones. And they can have relationships form that have no rational cognitive basis. They don't make any sense at all. I think the expression about the person, I'm not going to talk about the boyfriend of somebody who has a 5-month pregnant daughter. They called him sex on skates, okay? Sex on skates. What is that? Well, it's passion, but is there a relationship there? Well, who knows when you're 17? Is that a relationship or not? But that's something.
Smokey Robinson had a song, "You Really Got a Hold on Me." It says, "I don't like you, but I love you."
Exactly.
That's the key for this kind of experiment.
Very well put. That's exactly right. Actually, music, especially music of the 50s and 60s, is absolutely biological. It tells you, we could just name any song from that time.
It's more than the lyrics, though. And this is part of the other issue. The music of the 50s and 60s is in a certain frequency range.
Huh.
And it has very little bass. Bass is actually predator related. It gets us, so rap music gets us mobilized. But the lyrics of the 50s and 60s were tenors or it was higher voices, because that triggers our middle ear muscles and calms us down.
Except for Blue Moon.
Well, that can only.
That's
it's like
bass.
no. But you see, that's like they say. They say like, what about Barry White? People say. The issue with that is that music is only effective if you're in a quiet, safe environment. You don't play that music on a dance floor, with lots of lights going. It is already context specific. So if you're going to manipulate those low frequencies in a melodic way, you have to be in a safe environment. Huh. The point I'm making is that it's not just the lyrics. It was the lyrics with the music that changed the physiological state of the people and triggered them to feel that they were safe.
Yeah.
And this is the whole critical issue, feeling safe. And the main point here is I think we have really screwed up in our society by trying to talk about love as a single construct. And so the notion of even marrying this couple is to basically say that passionate experience, passionate aspect of what we're calling love, has a true validity in creating permanent relationships. And we shouldn't think that way. We might think of it more like the bonobo chimps, that it's a lot of fun, right? and not use it as a priority for creating lifelong relationships. We need to reverse it. We need to say, first filter is, are we safe with the person? Do we like the person?
Well, and just to follow that up, if a social bond is designed to get you to suppress what's in your own best interest in terms of promoting the well-being of another person, and individuals go down the road and form the relationship, form the bond in an unsafe circumstance. Maybe they were tricked in the beginning, with the whining and dining and and they felt felt very safe, and lo and behold, they're not. The problem is, once the bond is there, they're in an unsafe situation. Everyone's always, with a domestic violence situation or something like that. Well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave? Take care of yourself. Well, what if they're doing it to take care of the other person? So what if they're staying with what if their bond is really making them promote the well-being of the other person? It's ineffective to say, oh, well, save yourself and get out. And so how do you make somebody stop caring about another person at that point? It really is dangerous, and that's why it's so important.
I'm not so sure a psychoanalyst would agree with that way of...
Oh, this is what I'm saying is radical. I agree with you. I don't think anyone would...
But Stephanie, you also brought up infants. You brought up infants, and there is an important point there, because not all infants are cared for. Some infants are abandoned. And it's really interesting. One of the questions I ask my medical students and graduate students is, what is the common feature of a preterm baby, a fussy colicky baby, a child who is extreme ADHD, and an autistic child? So what is the parent? What's the common theme that the parents have? The common theme is the parents don't feel loved by the child.
Yeah.
They feel, I love my child, but my child doesn't love me. What are the features? Because the child is not giving this reciprocal facial interaction and cooing and smiling back. So the parent isn't getting that. And what do you find out with severe, very preterm babies? Often they're abandoned.
You see a precursor of the thing that you're talking about. If you assume that when infants get really scared doing like the Bowlby stuff, they feel tremendous anxiety and they grab and cling and are taken care of, you get a feel of the relationship of that to this desperate, passionate kind of love that doesn't pay attention to is it sensible.
Right.
Yeah.
We've done two kinds of research with kids going from 2 to like 25, and you'd think 2-year-old kids couldn't talk about love, but in this culture they can. And you find that the more anxious the kid in personality, the more desperate, even early, they feel about loving somebody or having a crush on somebody. In addition, if you manipulate anxiety and put people in an anxiety condition, their ratings of how passionately they love somebody go way up. We're aware of, I need somebody to take care of me. And so we're going from most kids being anxious, mean they want to be taken care of and loved and passion, to your saying if they find a suitable person, they calm down.
I don't mean to interrupt those. I mean, last week we did bring this up in the biology of sexuality about one-night stands.
Right.
And the one-night stand, they said, is not such a simple phenomenon. There's a tremendous amount of things going on chemically in order
Right.
to allow this to occur.
Right.
And that's the delusion of the whole, they...
Well,
So
okay,
cool,
so
let's
maybe
talk.
it's time to talk chemistry now a little bit. Okay, I think you brought up, it's a nice segue into this issue. And the chemical that I've spent my last 25 years sort of focusing on is oxytocin. Actually, 28 years. This one's 25, his brother's 28. And so I was given oxytocin on the day my first son was born. Massive amounts of it against my will, and that's another story. But I kept saying, what's this stuff? What is this molecule? What has been done to me? And more specifically, have I done something to my child by allowing myself to get this molecule, which, I might add, now in Chicago, at least at Northwestern Hospital, 93% of the babies born are born to mothers who've had extra oxytocin given to them. And we have never seen a single day, to talk about research that hasn't been done, there isn't a single bit of information on what we're doing. Are we hyping up those moms in some way that makes them more loving of the baby? Or are we actually down-regulating the feedback loops, and will those mothers be more vulnerable? We don't know anything. We don't
Thought
know
to increase
anything.
how well delivery will progress.
Yeah.
So it's commonly given to people who
The
enter
medical
labor.
excuse is
with
to
lots of other
speed it up,
names.
to speed up birth, or to start birth in the first place. You know, joke used to be, now doctors don't make any money, but the joke used to be they had a
Pitocin,
golf
you've heard
game.
of?
Yeah,
People,
Pitocin.
the OBGYNs will say we're going to pit out the baby.
Exactly.
And they mean give the mother
Getting out.
Pitocin.
But the
That's the
biology
term.
is that it increases contractility without softening the cervix.
Right, so the
So
baby's...
the child's getting pounded.
And then a C-section, of course, is the next step, and the rate of C-sections now just gone sky high. It used to be 5%, now it's 35%. Depends on the hospital. Some hospitals it's 50%, and so forth. We don't even want to get into this
It's another
because
example
it's
of how
another
unstudied
amazing-
biology clashes with culture.
Right.
And how many things that are diseases or conditions or problems is because we have such a little understanding of our intrinsic wiring and biology, and we're
Right.
always trying to do some new intervention. Sorry.
No, it's true. The interventions have almost always, medicine has always run ahead of theory. So something works. Indeed, giving Pitocin does speed up the contractions. It does not, as Steve said, soften the cervix, so there's a little problem there, and the human head being the big problem. But in the meantime,
So it's
back
better to be bridge.
yeah, well, no,
Well,
not really.
Breach is
Then
another.
you've got two legs coming out instead of the head. No, the head's perfectly designed to ram its
I
way.
understand that, but for this problem,
Right.
it's better not to bang your head.
Right.
Better just be born foot first.
Speaking as a mom.
Yeah. Well, there's no easy solution. Actually, this comes back to a sort of the whole evolutionary theme here. We probably would not be in this room being able to talk if it weren't for oxytocin, because prior to modern times, babies could only be born because the mother could produce that hormone that got that baby to the outside world. Without it, she would have been in trouble. Although mice can give birth without oxytocin, probably humans can't. We just have too big a head.
But they come out not as precocial as we
Yeah,
do.
mice are much less further along in development. And human babies are getting bigger. This is another sort of amazing thing. Babies are now, I think they're like a whole pound bigger on average than they were 25 years ago. And their heads are proportionally bigger too. And this is contributing to the Pitocin C-section and this whole story.
But some of that is also because there's an increase in metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance in women.
Well,
and
yes.
that insulin resistance drives a very large
That's
baby.
right. The mothers get bigger. Their babies have a longer gestation unless they're forced out.
Yeah.
We're in interesting times. We are really in biologically the most interesting time in history, because never prior to this very modern period of really post-World War II, I think, have there been so much change in physiology and so many manipulations of physiology. And the one that I'm particularly stuck on is this so-called hormone of love. So I'll give you a little background of how I began to use the word love. I would never use this word. I was studying a small mammal called a prairie vole, a little mouse-like thing. They formed lifelong pair bonds. I got sort of obsessed over what could be causing this. How could this happen? How could a mouse whose cortex, in fact, they probably don't need the cortex at all to do this. How could they, like a teenager, they don't need this stuff. They're working with brainstem constructs, as Steve says. So how could this happen? It's a long story, but I started studying the notion that oxytocin was part of this. I sent in a grant proposal in the early 90s, and I got back this strange review in which it said that oxytocin was being claimed to be the hormone of love, L-O-V-E. That word was in my review. And I said, well, wait a minute. I didn't use that word. Well, I was talking about attachment and pair bonds and these nice dry constructs. I wasn't talking about love. I wouldn't even think of it. And for about 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't use the word in public. I kept saying, no, a mistake has been made. I am not studying love. And then I realized, no, I guess I kind of have to go head on into the storm. So I organized a conference in 1996 called Is There a Neurobiology of Love? And we held it in Stockholm, which was appropriate. And it was sponsored by the Swedish government. It was quite an interesting meeting. Almost everyone there had never used the word love in public before either. So they were all kind of, mostly people I knew who were stress biologists, very physiological meeting. But I realized at that point that we were dying to know about this. The world really did want to know. And I mean, now, of course, if I wanted to, I could just do nothing but respond to the press. I had 3 phone calls yesterday. ABC News, Smithsonian Magazine, and USA Today. That's a typical day for me. Okay, and I've never written a book with love in the title. I've written a few papers, a couple. But there's just such a fascination with this. And I think it's because it's old in our nervous system, because it's deep, because it probably explains these strange findings that Stephanie has. It is indeed better to give than receive. There's something going on that we don't understand. We intuit that there's something important going on, We're fascinated by it. We can't understand it, partially because our cortex is sort of a late add-on to this story. And the real systems we're talking about here are pre-verbal. They're things that existed before we had words to explain them. And so we're working, and of course it makes business for Ed because we have all this strange stuff going on and we can't explain it. And so we know it's important. We know it drives us to do weird things. We know that it causes teenagers whose mothers tell them not to have sex to go ahead and have sex anyway. We know that there's something more going on, that these attachments form, that they're irrational, that couples that don't like each other stay together because they're bonded in some bizarre way to each other. And we know now that little prairie vole can do the same trick without much of a brain above the brainstem. So I think that that's part of the chemistry here that's what sort of brings this all together. I have one more thought on this, though. I'm not sure if there is such a thing as love or if there is such a thing even as social behavior. My own research keeps bringing me back, and I don't like the word stress any better, but it keeps bringing me back to the notion that a lot of what's going on is about managing emotional systems or affect regulation or something else that's deeper and probably older. And then we've labeled it with our complicated minds, cultures, life experiences, and so forth. We start labeling things. But deep inside of this is a biological system that might be the strongest one in our whole nervous system. Oxytocin is the most abundant chemical in terms of at least the gene that expresses it in the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is part of the core of the old brain that I'm talking about. It is not a small thing. It's not an obscure molecule because the actual original gene occurred before the split between vertebrates and invertebrates. So there are mollusks that have the same gene that regulates these chemicals in our own body. And oxytocin has a partner called vasopressin, and it plays off of a whole stress axis. So it starts to be able to work on the positive side, if you will. And maybe it isn't even a positive side, just the other side of allowing us to feel safe. Coming back to Steve's concept here. Someplace, and in all the literature that's coming out after all these years, I'm reading a paper from Don Pfaff's group on the plane coming here about how estrogen works. They're saying, well, estrogen works totally differently in rats or mice if the animal's in a fear-eliciting situation versus a safe situation, totally differently. Now that means there's an elaborate other chemistry in there that needs to be pulled apart. But we're just in a very interesting time, I think. And the reason I'm getting all these phone calls is the people, the press, people know it's not love they're calling me about. They're calling me about something that's mysterious, something they can't understand. I mean, we don't, as I say, love is just a big word that has at least 8 meanings, right, Elaine? Maybe 20. Depends on how you want to split it out. But kind of grossly passionate and compassionate. But even those probably both use oxytocin.
What do they call? What do they call you? What do they call about?
Oh, they usually want to know about oxytocin. But it depends on what's hot this week. I mean, infidelity, that's a big topic. I get a lot of calls about that. Why do people cheat? And I say, I don't know. That's not what I work on. I work on prairie voles, you know. But there's a lot of genetic work. Dolores has been involved with some of this, you know.
I had, been interested in, I mentioned in schizophrenia, what would explain the severe social deficits?
Exactly. That's.
And if you've ever had a dog or your neighbor does, you know that they'll just kind of come in and sniff you. And in that olfactory signal is the inner representation, not only of you as an individual, but probably of your intention. And when we internally represent the intentions of other people, there's a biology to that. So in schizophrenia, back I think in the early 90s, we started studying the sense of smell and its relationship to social capacity. And we found that we could almost completely explain a part of schizophrenia called the deficit syndrome by inability to identify odors. And now in other studies, we've done brain event-related potentials and looked at how odor signals are processed in the brain and shown different types of processing problems in bipolar people versus people with schizophrenia. So then the olfactory system becomes another interesting model, and maybe one of the ways that oxytocin or others of these systems could even be regulated. Your hypothalamus, actually key parts of it develop in the brain from the olfactory placode in the fetus. So as the fetus is developing, it's a part of the olfactory system that migrates up into the brain, becomes part of the hypothalamus. So if you want to say, well, gee, could we possibly be influenced by olfactory signals from other people that we're not aware of? I think the answer is most certainly going to be yes. So what's the difference between groups of young people who previously would hang out in someone's basement or garage, and now a group of young people who are connected on the internet? Are there implications of these types of olfactory signaling that we are giving and perceiving? People can actually discern something about the genetic immune capacity of other people. I guess the simplest way to say that, if you know that we have a tissue type for our cells in our body, or that if you needed a heart or a liver of a transplant, we have an HLA system that we try to match on. You have a unique odor, each individual, that's also based on that same system. So self or other at the level of your kidney or liver, and self or other for you as a whole human being are connected. Right. So a dog can discern non-identical twins, but not identical twins. So we're completely still naive about this. A woman who is looking for a mate choice, or the best we can do now, having people smell sweaty T-shirts, people will be most attracted to certain odors, and their interest in certain odors will be determined by genes they inherited from their father, not by the genes they inherited from their mother as much. And if we have time, we could talk about different effects of maternal and paternal genes. But during pregnancy or on birth control pills, someone then finds most pleasant the odor signal of someone related to them. So when we're looking to become pregnant, not that we're ever aware of that most times in our lives, or being sexually very active, we're predisposed to passionate, immediate intimacy, our brain is looking for a different chemical signal in a partner. Then when we're pregnant or cannot become pregnant, or for young women on birth control pills. And the person you might fall in love with on birth control pills may not be the same person you would otherwise have fallen in love with.
Well, wow. That's shocking.
But luckily, many other signals are very important in humans. And
I don't know, though.
I have to ask my wife what she was doing.
Well, but it's interesting how for many people the smell of their beloved has a powerful effect on them. And so I would just mention it as something to sniff out, because it's quite unappreciated by most of us.
The grant that I received from you guys, we used to assay oxytocin in women often who were or were not taking birth control pills, one of the groups we've run. And I don't understand this, but the women on contraceptives, some of them in the luteal phase, in a phase when their own hormones would normally be high, they have sky-high oxytocin, off scale. Weird, very strange. Now, this could be a pathology.
That's
so
right.
what this may be meaning is that the feedback loops aren't working right, and that their own body is actually overproducing, and whether they're using it or not, I don't know yet. But I mean, we were shocked to find this. It's not every woman. It's just, it was a subset, but we never saw them in women not taking contraceptives. So there's a whole new field of science sitting out there we've just spelled out for you today. So if any of you are bored and don't know what to do in the next 20
that? Is there
years.
any symptom that you spot in that? I mean, or is it you're just commenting?
It's just, well, you know, in science now everything has to be done so blind, and we can't know very much about people except what we tell the IRBs we're going to do in the first place. So we had no way of anticipating this. We didn't ask the right questions. All we know about these women, they were being studied for cognitive function. I had the bloods, as I explained in this little proposal that I sent you guys a while back. I have access to any number of samples that I didn't have any resources. Anybody doesn't know what to do with their spare pocket change, send it to me and we'll use it to do more studies, because these studies are expensive, but they're just showing me all kinds of things. We're finding certain pathological populations, I can't even mention, it's a super secret, but genetic deficits that are giving us also sky-high oxytocins. And we're finding others. People who have pathologies seem to have, and this is not, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect this. We're not getting, almost never, let's say autism, do we get a simple thing like very low, autistics have very low oxytocin. Read that. You can read that in the literature, but it's wrong. It's just wrong. What we're finding is some people who who've been called autistic are low. Others are extremely high. We saw this also in schizophrenia and published that last year. These are just, I think their feedback loops are broken. I think that the system, I don't think oxytocin is a biomarker of feeling good. I wish it were, because then Stephanie and I could just go around and do these studies, because she's also working with oxytocin. There's a woman at Michigan that works with Stephanie.
Yeah, we find that same pattern with PTSD symptoms and
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Post-traumatic stress, yeah.
A study during pregnancy looking at post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and also looking at women who've had a history of abuse. And it looks like the history of abuse is marked by off-the-chart levels of oxytocin.
High levels, yeah. Julia Sims.
Yeah.
Putting together what Steve, what you were saying, we've done some work with autistic kids because I've been interested in emotional contagion. And one way we read other people's minds is as I watch you, my face automatically mimics what yours is doing. And if we take a movie of that, we can see the tracking really well, and that kind of enables me to read your mind and your emotions, because I feel a little bit what you're feeling. So we did some work with autistic kids, because the question was, is it just that they're not paying attention, that they're not tracking, that they cannot pay attention, or is it even if they pay attention, they're not mimicking? And so we really worked extremely hard to get a stimulus here where there are arrows pointing, corrugator, zygomat, arrow, bells. The kid is held there, so he's got to be looking exactly at the person. They don't do anything, even when they pay attention. Go ahead.
Okay, we did a similar study in which we put EMG electrodes on the face. And we created a whole different type of stimuli, because people have been studying affect by using static pictures, but our nervous system really doesn't work with static pictures. We're looking at dynamic, and this is really the intentionality issue. So we had faces that went from neutral to target emotions that were morphed. So it took 15 to 30 seconds to go from a neutral face to a target. And we had eye gaze plus EMG electrodes, okay? So what's interesting is really, first of all, autistic kids don't look at the upper face. They avoid looking at the upper face. Second, they have more movement in the lower face in terms of EMG activity, so the zygomatics are exaggerated. Now, the interesting part is the upper face is bilaterally innervated. The lower face is contralateral. The upper face is really the critical part that we look at for subtle emotions. Okay? Even for distinguishing the difference between anger and fear, which, by the way, the autistic kids made many mistakes. Okay, we then did a study on HIV positive and HIV negative women. And the only feature, okay, we can distinguish different the other part was the autistic kids had less vagal regulation of the heart, so their physiological states were more mobilized. With the HIV, women, negative and positive, were very similar. The positive had less vagal activity on the heart. They made more mistakes in anger and fear and disgust. Now, there's a third study, which isn't mine now, which is using scopolamine, which blocks central inhibitory cholinergic pathways, and that knocks out accuracy for fear, anger, and disgust. Okay, so this is critical when you deal with populations, especially now PTSD, which is a project we're starting now. If a person who suffers PTSD misunderstands the affect of his or her spouse and sees anger when fear is there, you get abuse. Okay. Okay, so it's misreading. And why are they misreading? Because they're not getting the information from the upper part of the face. When do you not look at the upper part of the face? Now, this is tied together.
Can't hear that.
It has to do when you are, in a sense, in a state of hypervigilance and fear, immobilized, because you don't make eye contact. You look at teeth, which is our evolutionary heritage, and you look off.
How
So
interesting.
so the eyes are doing what they're supposed to do when you're in a state of fear. So the issue is you're trying to protect yourself. And it's only when you are in a safe environment that you make the eye-to-eye contact. Now, how do you get people into the safe contact? How do you get, it's not always by sniffing, because sometimes that's viewed as socially inappropriate.
Sometimes. I will say, it's funny, I have a cat who's a pussycat,
Yeah.
and she's never been upset and anything I can throw around the house. And one night I was teasing her, and I went over and I went, and she slapped me. My cat, and jumped up and I thought, isn't that amazing how wired in that must be? That for this animal, me sniffing her was a new threat.
But if you,
So you never know.
if you use, this is for the therapists in the room as well, and those who are trying to seduce other people.
Hopefully not.
If you use a
Same.
modulated voice, you stay out of the low ranges, you move up into a higher range, modulate it, and you use facial expressivity, it calms people down. If they can, now with certain pathologies, if you do this, you basically have to titrate. So, in a sense, talking with a modulated voice triggers areas. And this is an area of the brain in the temporal cortex called the superior temporal sulcus near what's called the face area or fusiform face area. This actually picks up biological movement and intentionality. So intonation of voice is biological movement and intentionality. Facial expressivity is biological movement. And look, this hand's moving. I didn't want it to move, but it's moving. And the part for hand gesture is in the same place. And this area turns off our defensive fight-flight system. But we all know this. Even the head nodding is part of it.
And if the person, I mean, Steve and others have done experiments on still face.
Yeah,
and you might want to mention
We're
that's
doing
really-
studies with babies from 6 months to 2 years, and we use a still face protocol where either the experimenter or the mother just doesn't respond. And the amazing thing is, of course, the infant starts to engage and tries to get the attention of the experimenter or the mother, and then if they stay in that mode, the baby will just freak out and cry.
Now, I'm not allowed to say this, so I'm not going to. But as you're talking, I kept thinking, God, I wish I could ask you about John McCain not doing eye contact.
Oh, yeah,
last night.
you can, you may.
Okay,
You may.
tell me your
I'm
thoughts.
very, very pleased. Okay, those of you who live in New York City, and most of you do, who makes eye contact on the streets? You don't normally make eye contact on the street because you're really signaling that you're not accepting. So all this demonstration was this person, he was not accepting him, which he wasn't. And what was Obama doing? You're right, John, engaging, and, since trying to create a common ground like you do when you have a dialogue or a debate. So he was, or negotiation. But the point was very clear. He was trying to create a situation in which there was a separation of ideas and people. And I'm sure he was basically schooled on that. Now, that doesn't play well to audiences. And they should have learned, because Gore made the same mistake during the debates, in a sense of being kind of non-engaging, and got hurt. So McCain did not come across as being as likable as Obama.
When you talk about
post-traumatic stress.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Okay, the issue, this is a serious issue here.
Interesting.
When someone is, of course, been held hostage, this changes their biology for life and their ability to trust people.
I was going.
How in
It's okay. We're about to open, but we'll let this, Ed can have the last point from the circle, and then we'll open up.
As I've been listening to you talk about this, what is it that stops us from being more aggressive?
Okay, I started off in 1994. I presented what I called the polyvagal theory, and the title was basically orienting in a defensive world. How did we, as mammals, turn off our normally aggressive reactive systems so that we can engage each other? Then I started to realize that if we studied the phylogeny of vertebrates and studied the transition from reptiles to mammals, we would get lots of clues. And these are actually the structures and systems that turn off these old defensive systems. One happens to be this new myelinated vagus that's linked to the facial muscles. So when we use prosody and we even ingest and listen to people talking and make good facial expressivity, we calm our heart down. The other part that's in the transition from reptiles to mammals, is the detachment of middle ear bones. It seems so esoteric, but it's so critical. It enables us to hear low amplitude sounds in background noise. We can hear human voice, even though background noises could be greater. So we're actually tuned to pull that in, but we can only do that when we exercise this whole system. So when we listen to human voice in background sound, to hear it, we have to turn down all these other systems and calm ourselves down. So Clinton, by the way, learned over the years to master that. He used exaggerated prosody. Exaggerated prosody is what vocal music is. Vocal music is prosodic, is intonation, but pushes it to an extreme. So we developed a research protocol that used exaggerated prosody with autistic kids. We actually took vocal music and then computer altered it to have greater swings in frequencies, so that it was like 100,000 times more prosodic than vocal music. And we changed, actually for 60% of the kids who were in the study, their auditory hypersensitivities disappeared. And in our other studies, we showed that eye gaze went to the eyes almost reflexively, and their autonomic state became more vagal or calmer. So this system is really, in many individuals, accessible. So we're, in a sense, triggering it to turn off defensiveness. So if you look at autism and you say, well, that child is in the physiological state that has an adaptive function. That adaptive function is to protect themselves. Now, how can we trick or trigger the circuit to say, it's really safe? And what I've been working on is the notion of prosodic sounds to calm people down.
Yeah, well,
So in what you were saying, then, how is it that in a situation, what happens to the aggression of the person, to the need to protect or defend oneself, when the husband is beating them up every day and they stay in the marriage?
This goes to another sequence. This actually goes to the concept of social defeat. And you want to talk about that, sir?
well, we could. There's so many. This is actually, we're getting to the meat of this story. But animals, when they're defeated, release vast amounts of oxytocin, the highest amounts possible. They just flood themselves with it. Steve's polyvagal theory explains this as a way of there's an old vagus. The old vagus is what oxytocin's really hitting. And what it's doing is putting you into a state where you can withstand that kind of bad experience or even die. Okay.
Is it also possible that it is reducing your own aggressive response?
Absolutely.
I think so.
And
Absolutely.
so it
Yeah.
may be, because the clinical experience in those situations is that the wife is furious at the husband. And in fact, the more furious the wife is towards the husband, the more likely it is that they stay in that situation.
Really?
And so is it possible that that's what's happening, that they're in fact controlling their own rage all the time and staying in the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of suppressing self-interest maps on it perfectly to what
You can reverse this and stop using, you may not have to use the word self-interest. You can talk about adaptive functions of different physiological states.
Right, it's a poor word.
So when we're in a state that accesses this neuroregulation of the face, we can socially engage, we can be creative, we can be generative, we can be benevolent, because we have everything.
Suppressing like a fight or flight.
But if we go into a fight or flight, we don't have anything. We're basically hypervigilant, we're protective, and we're not very sensitive to others. But there's a lower level, which is this immobilization state in which oxytocin allows. And phylogenetically, it allowed it for nursing behavior and delivery. But it can be co-opted to allow an individual who's been abused to basically stay in that relationship. So what it does is it protects an individual. For mammals, immobilization is potentially lethal. Okay, it's just not a good thing. Reptiles have it as a normal strategy. So phylogenetically, oxytocin co-opted that old reptilian immobilization circuit to enable nursing, enable reproductive behaviors, and parturition. But it's also been affected in terms of abusive behaviors.
Well, here's, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have a question, though. The one thing that I can't seem to get my head around is thinking about okay, so oxytocin and the system may help to suppress your fight or flight drive. What enables you to become aroused to protect those that you love when you're needing to engage that fight or flight drive, but for another circumstance?
Vasopressin. another hormone that probably is another roundtable. But the system that, okay, there are a couple things that I can't help myself, I've got to say. First, the idea that oxytocin is good, we have to get, like more is better is not panning out. That's what this grant is helping me discover, and Julia's stuff, and it just isn't that simple. And you can buy this compound on the internet. They're calling it OxyCalm, C-A-L-M, to spray up your noses if you want, and to give to your autistic kids. The kids are coming into our clinics at UIC. The parents are saying, oh, it's working, it's great. Who knows, But it's a chemical that's got more than one job, and indeed it may allow us to tolerate these impossible situations. But we've also, it's every time it's activated, in the data we've seen so far, vasopressin is too.
Yeah, but let me just insert one comment. It may promote predator behavior. If it turns off the defensive hypervigilance stuff, it may promote predator behavior.
From others, or from you.
By anyone.
Well, it probably does. But anyway, so we have these old systems, and then thank goodness we've added some layers of cognitive function and things on top that allow us most of the time. In fact, my friend Sarah Hurdy has written this amazing book called Mothers and Others. It's not out yet, but it will be soon, and it's about the evolution of human behavior. And she talks about being in an airplane getting into an airplane with a lot of people, and everyone's pretty civil, and no one bites anybody or anything. And then she imagines a bunch of chimps in the airplane. So she's a primatologist. And the chimps she said, you would limbs would be all over the place. These are common chimps, not bonobos. This just wouldn't work, okay? So there is some role for the thing on top. But underneath it are these emotional regulators, and I think they're creating these states that we can't understand, like love, like rage. They're not just oxytocin, but the whole chemistry of that to stay alive, to protect your others. In fact, Sarah's whole book is based on the notion that humans evolved as cooperative breeders, and the only reason we're here today is that you not only had a mother, but you had an allo-aunt, an allo-parent, but not necessarily the father, others who came in and helped to take care of the infant. And they had to be rewarded by this physiological feeling good. They had to feel good, or they wouldn't have kept on doing it, because they weren't parents.
But there's one problem. If the issue is that many of the people who get into this state, whether they're being abused or predator behavior, don't protect their offspring. Okay, so it's difficult for them to recruit this other circuit.
Right. No. Right. But it sounds like what's important is that this other circuit that gets recruited is suppressing a defensive fear response, not so much the sympathetic nervous system
view it
in its
as
entirety.
a phylogenetically ordered hierarchy in which we use our newest circuits first to negotiate safety. That doesn't work. So that's a social, I talk to you, I navigate. That doesn't work. I go into a fight-flight system. If that doesn't get me, so if I'm in a confined area and I can't get out of there, then this immobilization circuit is my last resort. So it's not suppressing, it's literally turning off, going down. And so when people who have really experienced severe life threat and become severe PTSD, and I again don't want to use always clinical disorders because it's really the life threat response that is critical, they have triggered this circuit, and this circuit is unusual. It's not like fight-flight because it's literally a one-trial learning. Right. You don't get out of it easily. And that's why the traditional treatments don't work. And calling it stress is really a problem.
I think we've got to go to the audience here. We're
Lois, do you want to just come up to
Please.
the microphone because we need to get you on the. We need to get you on the.
sorry.
For those watching it at home.
Home?
Okay.
I'd just like to ask Dr. Malaspina very briefly whether this discussion of oxytocin fits in with your understanding of catatonia.
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 So the question was whether or not this discussion fits in with an understanding of catatonia. I think if we were thinking about that, maybe Steve's point as to yet more primitive systems that are involved in immobilization would be interesting. In the U.S., catatonia has plummeted, and it's pretty rarely seen now, although it exists in third world countries more commonly. But I would think of your last system.
The answer is yes, I think. She's saying yes. Probably,
certainly
but
so.
I don't think there's much
Not
research.
oxytocin as much as.
Well, actually, if I want to respond to that,
Yeah.
the third system is more like the death feigning of a mouse, and that would not be catatonia. At least I don't think.
Well,
You have, because you have to have high muscle tone for catatonia, don't you?
Yeah, you don't have much volitional control over your motor tone. You assume a posture, and then there's some flexibility.
Yeah.
It's actually seen more in depression at this point, severe depression.
So it
than
might be related.
psychosis.
might be. Good question.
Say who you, everyone who comes up, please say who you are.
Steve Birnbach. Two things, and I know it's not usually good to introduce two things, but I like to hear about both. And the evolutionary aspect, grooming keeps coming to mind, and I'm wondering if there are studies, of the physiology of the neurosciences related to seeing what happens when creatures in the evolutionary line who have developed grooming, because that seems to me to be very related, particularly to the issue of safety. And then the other thing was, you mentioned earlier something happening, I think it was in relationship to safety in the eyes open. And of course, in world literature, we have this repeated time and time again, connections being made in relationship to the eye. But Helen Fisher, I think it was last week, said there was no studies she was aware of about that. So that seems also very interesting. What triggers, what were you saying triggers that whole thing that concludes in that?
Okay.
And the grooming and that.
Well,
Thanks.
the eyes, it's the last one's easiest to go.
Right.
It's the orbit of the eye that's opening that enables us to now gaze. So this is part of the facial muscle. It's actually the seventh cranial nerve controls this. And this orbit is opposing the eyelid. So when this nerve goes, people's eyelids droop. Okay? So, and this is part of our whole facial expressivity. And so if we trigger that facial nerve, and this is linked to listening, and even in ingesting, which will start triggering some of the facial muscles, the face starts to work. Okay? On that part. The grooming, I'm going to go let Elaine talk someone.
I don't know. I think there are a couple of studies showing that when primates groom, they and the partner begin to relax, and it decreases aggression.
Well, from my view, there are 2 points occurring. One is they're going out of sight and touching. So if they work from behind, you're now feeling you have to be safe with the individual. So it's a critical relationship to allow grooming from behind. The other part is that with grooming, when it's dealing at least with the head, and some of it is, it's pulling again on these muscles, and it's very calming and
That's
relaxing.
interesting. I didn't know that.
Well, the first studies of oxytocin's effects that I can think of were actually animals just alone given extra oxytocin, and they began this intense grooming, intense self-grooming, like 100 times more than normal. There was nobody else there to groom. When you put mice that don't know each other together, it's a little complicated, and you might not get what you expect. But in prairie voles that form social bonds, what happens, you give them extra oxytocin, they immediately go into contact with each other. They go through a small kind of courtship, if you will, and then they sit, and one will move and the other will move, and they allow this kind of immobility, to quote Dr. Porges, immobility without fear, which is a very special state And that really probably does sum up what oxytocin does. So indeed, it can override these systems. If we didn't have it, we'd be the chimpanzees with the arms loose. We'd be in a really bad situation. It's bad enough as it is.
The product of our civilization is to allow immobilization without fear. It enables us to reproduce, enables us to sleep.
And to have imagination, you see. So it's really very relevant.
As long as we don't have to be hypervigilant to orient towards potential predator, the systems start to really develop very interesting characteristics.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So we got all the questions? Come on, guys.
We got more.
There's a line behind.
Oh, excellent.
Sorry.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Maya Solovitz, a science journalist. I first wanted to ask you about the thing where people's ears kind of perk up when they are not frightened. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if that had anything to do with like how when you're getting older, your hearing loss starts with, and if you were less frightened, if you might be able to be better.
Well, yes, if you're less frightened, you're going to be better. But what you do is by making eye contact, you look at mouth movements and head movements, and you fill in the gaps. Okay, so the example is there's a example of Ronald Reagan giving a speech. If you just hear the auditory part, it's broken up. There's like words, you hard to understand. But you see the video, it looks crisp. So our brain, by taking information regarding head movement and facial expressivity, fills in the gap.
But if you could make people feel safer, you can also make them hear better too, possibly?
Right. Well, yes, but what they're not doing is really hearing. They're understanding better. There are two things going on. They're able to listen. So we have really a vocabulary problem because listening is not the same thing as hearing. We can put people in sound chambers and they can hear perfectly. We can put them in a social environment and they can't extract a word because they're being bombarded with low frequency sounds that they can't filter.
Right.
And this filtering is not on the cortical level like a lot of people think. It's peripherally in the middle ear.
Right.
And that's just like our facial expressivity. It's our brainstem is regulating that.
Great. I wanted to ask one other quick thing. There's a new theory about autism, or relatively new, where the idea is that the causal factor is really that it's overwhelming sensory intensity and overwhelming fear. And I was just wondering what you thought about that in light of the polyphony.
Well, you can mimic many of the autistic behaviors through that type of modeling in many normal people.
Right. And neglect and abuse and stuff like that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that is the cause or the mechanisms of autism. It may mean that you can now create similar types of phenotypical behaviors that way.
Because what these people are claiming is that there's sort of hyper-processing going on, and hyper-processing particularly in the amygdala and also in the sort of that business of long-range connections versus like lots of short-range.
One could make it very parsimonious and basically say that the signal to noise is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think that does make some sense?
It makes some sense to explain some of those features, yes.
One of the concepts you guys haven't talked about, I'm Richard Elvin Fisher. You haven't mentioned choice. And I don't know if all prairie voles are alike, but I know that all people aren't. So I was wondering what you had to say about that into these equations.
Elaine probably could.
No, I don't know anything in science.
I can tell you that I do some studies where we take people and force them to help somebody. We don't give them the choice. And we find that helping is associated with faster recovery from cardiovascular stress, even in that circumstance. That it seems like something about engaging the motor programs required that you think ostensibly are about helping another person are regulating your stress somehow.
I'm sorry.
They don't. Well, they consent to the study, right? So, and then you randomly assign them after that. But we tell them, this is what you're going to do. You're going to help. This is so they. They can choose to participate, absolutely, but they don't choose. I mean, there's an informed consent process.
I think, though, one of the thoughts is that we have many of these primitive systems. People tend not to be aware that they can learn to regulate them. and that we have in our thinking brain and our higher evolved structures many opportunities to, through feedback or other mechanisms, have some say over our automatic behaviors. I think that's having a big effect on some types of psychotherapeutic treatment, but it should empower people in other ways in society as well. The idea that could be debated is, should you follow any emotion that you have? Well, probably not. Then you'd be a bunch of chimpanzees on that plane, right? We may have emotions, but we have to manage them and understand them. And so I think in that way, choice is a very relevant concept.
I will also say that even though choice, like in our studies, as of yet doesn't appear to undo what we discover, the motivation behind what happens does seem to have an effect. So unless people care about the person they're helping, you do not get those same benefits. And we're starting to find this in a lot of different samples. So that it's almost like engaging some sort of caring system is important. So the idea that you can come and take somebody and force them to help, I don't know that obligatory coerced kind of help might engage the same thing.
Hi, my name is Edie. I really never knew that I was going to get up here today because it said love code, chemistry, intimacy. We're talking about predators, autism, fear. Okay, and so what happened when we got there and memories and other ideas of tangent situations started to appear in my brain, and I might be able to help you with something because it's not in the research. A friend, a very beautiful woman, came home one night to her apartment after having a lovely evening and walked in, and someone was in the apartment and grabbed her. This person was escaping from having robbed another apartment, jumped over the roof onto her air conditioner, somehow jimmied the thing, and grabbed her and had a gun and said he was going to kill her. And this is a young man, and she's a beautiful young woman. He takes her up on the roof and does not want her to have any eye contact with him. It's the first general rule. Don't look at me. They were there for 11 hours. And he released her. I would say that intimacy took place there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
I would say that the mellifluousness of this woman's voice, the fact that she looked like a beautiful, maybe fashion model, but she was a teacher. She was someone who dealt with difficult children. Gave her some armor. I don't know about oxytocin. I don't know about that. Gave her something. I don't know what her stem, what happened with her stem and what was released. What was released, I don't know. We're not in the lab, and I certainly don't know anything about this man. But what she did was engage him. Social engagement under very trying circumstances. She got to know him while he did not want her to know him. And because a long period of time took place under very, very difficult circumstances, because he definitely had this gun against her head. She swept her hair. She looked at him when he didn't want her to look at him, and she said, I might as well, because I would like to know who's going to kill me. I mean, I don't even know your name. So she used all the social graces of some kind of crazy scenario script, which in some crazy way got a wedge, some kind of wrinkle, opened it up, and after 11 hours, my friend is alive.
Yeah.
I saw her 3 days later when she was telling me the story, and she jumped out of her skin when the ice in her drink moved. She was so upset.
Yeah.
This man was apprehended because he had done 2 other apartments before he got into hers, so he was caught. But I can tell you that there are skills that we don't even know about with intimacy that people may have that they don't even know they have when their lives are threatened.
Well, I think you're absolutely,
the eye and the
right,
voice.
right
The eye and the voice.
about the features, but the ability to access those is not always voluntary. So this woman had the ability to access it. Some people will pass out. Some people will dissociate under the exact same situations, and not because they want to. It's because their nervous system doesn't have the resilience and buffering that hers did. It's brilliant, and it's just a marvelous statement of her resilience to be able to deal with that.
Also, luckily, that man could be engaged, because there are some humans who, no matter how much intimacy, their systems, automatic systems, could not have been accessed, like the man's were that she got to.
I think one of the ideas was that she didn't immediately tell him, look, don't do this, you're doing it wrong. She was accepting the situation and saying, well, this is inevitable, and you really don't know me, and I don't know you, and this is going to happen, or whatever, something like that. It did. Okay. Now the other thing there was one other point I wanted to make. Well, it skipped my. I'm sorry.
While you're thinking, in theorizing, one thing that I realized I missed like 40 years ago when I was doing social justice research is the difference between close relationships and the other out there. Because I did a lot of work on social exchange and equity, and that in intimate relationships, how much you've got to give and getting it back, and what makes people feel fair or unfair. And then as I was thinking of everybody as part of a community, and they felt they had to be fair and have social justice, etc. And then as I grew up and learned more about the world, you see such horrible cruelty, you can hardly believe it. You Hutus and Tutsis and Serbians, and you see people capable of hacking each other to death and torturing each other, and they're not worried about these little gradations of social justice. They have no feeling at all for the other. And so the thing that you're raising is, what can bring someone to have none of those empathetic responses that we talk about versus having some? And when I was a therapist, dealt with clients that could go all the way from the lowest level of animal that would say, I'm sure she didn't mind that I killed her. I would have gone to jail if I hadn't killed her. So she would understand that. No ability at all to know where that person is, to people so smart they could know what you thought and how you'd see it, and what you thought and how you'd see it. I mean, they could keep like 6 people in mind at one time and juggle and understand. The cognitive abilities of that are breathtaking. And we haven't done enough work, maybe starting to think from an evolutionary perspective, because I had always thought of us evolving in big groups and we hardly get 5 miles away from where we are, versus the out group that is like thought of as another species entirely, and we don't even have them, and how that would work. We really don't know anything about that at all.
Well, actually, as you were talking, I started to think about all the conflicts in countries that had more than one language, and started to think about how intonation and vocalization convey safety, and that talking in foreign tongue makes people feel unsafe. And then I also start to think about how religions and radical viewpoints are always trying to define others as not being worthy to live.
Yes,
defining
absolutely.
the other, and the danger of defining other human beings as the other.
And the joy sometimes in hurting other people.
But if you create the metaphorical structure, like concepts of purgatory, the sooner you kill them, the sooner they all get to heaven. And this was actually, the Reformation was all about things like this. And you start understanding how religion was being used to justify all this. I'm sorry to divert.
No.
Another question.
Hi, my name's Ingrid.
Hi.
Hello. I'm not very good at asking quite scientific questions, but I'm going to try. I kind of just have to tell you a personal experience, and then I need to see what you guys think about it, if possible. I'm trying to ask you about generations and about that with love. I recently, within the last 2 years, had this very strange sort of chemistry with someone that wasn't part of my age group. And I'm just curious as to, it's just like a profound love and friendship, but beyond that. And it's like, I mean, it's like, I mean, and I, the thing that's funny is that, I have, just wait.
Actually, I'll just respond. I assume the person is older.
I'm hoping, yeah.
But the point is that it's probably much easier to feel safe with a person who's older than a person who's the age. And so the first step of a relationship was easily established because you could feel safe.
And I wonder because I have like boyfriends. Well, I have a boyfriend, or I mean, no, I don't. I'm dating someone kind of that is my age. And even, I mean, during this time, I still have people that are my age, but I still have this like undying love for. And I just wonder,
does it feel romantic, or does it feel paternal or maternal?
This is so funny that I'm doing. It's like this. It's not that or the other. It's just. It's
okay.
like.
This is actually, the fact that you can't find the words is because these are feelings that don't have one-to-one relationship with words. And I mean, if we can use you as a wonderful example, which is actually tying the whole roundtable together, because you have these experiences and you're searching for words and organizing principles that you want to use to guide you in your life decisions. And we don't really have good words. So you're confused. What confuses isn't the right word.
But I wonder scientifically, like, is that just with chemicals and things?
It's biological, certainly.
Is it? Because if it is someone that's not in my generation, but I still feel this, like,
I don't
strange.
know. I have lots of friends.
And it's only this one person. It's
they
not like
feel like they yearned for the kind of family they see in Italian movies, of this warm, loving thing. And here they are, so smart, and they can't get anything going with their families. Somehow everybody kind of slips away. And what they do is form close attachments of the kind you're describing that can last a lifetime. And their families aren't their families. They're people they've met in the world that feel like their families. And those relationships can be so satisfying and so intense and provide things that families, for some reason, do not sometimes provide.
Well, I would like to say, though, that since there is no chemical at the moment that is going to alter your state,
Lots of jogging.
As a non-scientist psychoanalyst, in my experience, there is a reason for this. The question is for you to find the reason, and it's not always easy to find the reason. Sometimes it takes a lot of time and effort. But I haven't seen one situation where there wasn't a reason.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It's like 2 years of just.
But it feels so good.
Oh, it is. It's great. It's terrible. It's everything.
The reason that I'm saying that is every time there's a new invention, starting with like the telegraph, we go on 2 tracks. There are scientists meticulously and carefully trying to figure out how it works, people like you guys. And at the same time, there are crooks and charlatans that come from a capitalist country and offer things that take your breath away. They're just like the guys that had Ponzi schemes back when the telegraph was first going. Well, we have groups of neuroscientists now that say, send us your DNA, and we can guarantee that your husband won't cheat on you, you'll find the perfect man, your kids will get into the best schools. Honest to God, write to me if you want this kind of thing, because I know every scheme out there. And there are romantic love people that talk about, and they're respectable, but they say love is an addiction, and the reason that marriages aren't working is because people are taking all these tranquilizers, and we can stop kids from the pain of romantic love by giving them some of these tranquilizers so that doesn't happen. And I'm just thinking, celebrate, boy, are you great having all these wonderful feelings?
I must say I don't agree with that, because I don't think it's all great.
No. Well,
just
in
from your
part,
talking
it
about
is
See,
great.
I think there's another issue going on, at least if I'm reading what you're saying, and this is you're trying to make life decisions.
Well, no, it's not even about that. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
like, yes, that's...
Because if you're not, I go with Elaine. Enjoy yourself.
I'm just
Confused, get help.
I just wonder about generations and what is...
Generations are almost irrelevant.
We're
I think
biological.
that's life.
Yeah.
That's what I like.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that she's knowing what she's feeling.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Well,
thinking.
but the only issue is
I don't.
No, the thing is because I talked to my mom about this, and I mean, my dad's a doctor, so he has a completely different idea about these things, and my mom's and she actually works with autistic children, and we've all I just don't understand this feeling.
Is there an obstacle?
Pardon?
Is there an obstacle? Is there a reason why you aren't?
Well, it's just strange when I'm dating someone, but I have this older man that I just adore.
Have wonderful people who dedicated their life to entering a dialogue and helping someone understand their interests and conflicts.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be so greedy and with my personal stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
okay.
Could you state your name?
It's Seth Porges, related to a couple of these people. But I'm curious because America, we're used to having lots of wiggle room and elbow room and personal space. Other countries, you don't have that. In Mumbai or Beijing, I'm sure people are very crowded compared to here. And I'm assuming then that we have different tolerance levels when forming social relationships and bonds, and that different defenses are up than if you're in a place where people are much more crowded. And I'm curious if there are any differences that we know about in terms of our ability compared to people in more crowded locales without personal space for forming relationships, and if there are different types of bonds that form under those scenarios, and if there are any social pathologies that exist in those areas that don't exist here, or vice versa, because our tolerance for being on top of each other is very different.
Actually, I'm going to start with thank you as a gentleman who just asked that question. When I was in India, I noticed that people don't give you, if you stand in line behind someone and you do the normal American bit of leaving a couple feet so you're not breathing down their neck, someone will squeeze in. And this occurs even at the airports everywhere. Then I started to think, as you start talking, how are relationships created in India? The family does the first filtering, selecting. So perhaps in certain intensely crowded environments, larger units are involved in finding and identifying appropriate mates. Maybe.
I would also say, even getting back to your question, the generational issue could be just completely imposed by the particular, culture that we happen to be in, and it's just we don't select partners, but we make it completely inappropriate to maybe you're using olfactory cues to find this person, and you're told that that's wrong by the society that you live in, who's choosing your mate for you in some way, and
With globalization, changes are occurring that are breathtaking. So that when I first started research, you could pick up differences in how, are you in love right at this moment? How intensely in love are you right at this moment? And if I describe someone to you that is beautiful, perfect, rich, charming, everybody loves her, but there's zero chemistry, would you marry her? Same thing for the guy. He's got everything, but no chemistry. In America, for example, 50 years ago, men would say, no, I wouldn't. I've got to have passion. Women would say yes. Year by year, those have grown closer together so that now men and women are identical in saying they have to have passion.
Well,
Just say.
Yeah, yeah.
They even now in America say, if I fell out of love, I would not stay married. Men and women, identically. If you go around the world now, 40 years ago, you'd get big differences between Western cultures and other cultures in would you marry someone you didn't love and would you stay married. The newest research says the only places left pretty much where people will say that are India and Pakistan. Globalization has changed MTV, movies, so that even in India now, there are dating sites like Computer Match, so that you find what's required, but personal choice is coming in. Now,
I want to talk back about India, because when I was over there, my host brought me over the in-laws' place. And they met each other at the day they were married. And I was just totally shocked. And then I started to think about this and started to understand what they were really doing. They were really, if the families were good families and invest in their children and had good insight, they shopped. Then I watched, because I was spent a month there, and then I flew back. I met a lot of other people on the flight. I met a young lady who was of marrying age, and she was going through the shopping bit. And so it was still within the mold, but the families had selected 6 people. Now, she had like a PhD in computer engineering, and they found 6 people with similar backgrounds. And so in a sense, the globalization has impacted on that if the people have resources.
I'll tell you something else that's interesting. I have 2 Indian students, and their parents think they're matching them in this way. The girls are already living with other guys and just waiting till they get their degrees to tell. Yeah, absolutely.
I point one thing out that in India, they use astrology a lot to
Yes.
bring people together.
Yes.
Astrology also based on physics and interaction of energy.
In Indonesia as well.
You know, I don't want to say anything disparaging about having choice in who you end up with, but I mean, the part of there is a part of the brain that the nucleus accumbens that has been linked to a romantic love or being addicted, sexual. It's associated with sexual behavior. It's also associated with gambling. It's also associated with chemical addiction. It's fueled by threat and feelings of not being safe. If you imagine a civilization in which, let's just say, there are constant signs of threat, that are bombarded, that are bombarding us through our television sets, and there are constant messages of you can get what you want now. Eat as much chocolate as you want, as much trans fat as you want, whatever you need. This is also the area for food preferences. If you have these, and reinforcement, conditioning, learning, it all happens in the same area of the brain. If you imagine priming this area, you could imagine, and this area has to be regulated, has to be suppressed in order to engage in the kind of helping behavior that I'd been describing earlier. If you imagine a civilization that's really saying this is the way to go, you could end up in situations where this love addiction really isn't necessarily what's going to be in your best interest or the best interest of your family, of anyone really. I mean, and what's probably important is a balance between this almost, it's not a greed, I wouldn't say greed, but this sex drive, essentially, it needs to be regulated by the other parts that are nurturing, caring, and they're not necessarily the same thing. I think that's why we have the dichotomy.
One little reservation, though, and that is, we're talking now as if in tribal societies, when, say, you're married off, I'm a wise father that thinks what would be good for you,
right, exactly,
etc. The problem is, in many tribal societies, it's could I get that piece of land near me, and how much money does this person have? And we don't value women very much, and so we'll toss you out to the highest bidder, so that in tribal societies in general, men have more choice than do women. They have an opinion. They're happier in parent-matched marriages than are women. The ideology says, oh, after you're married, you will come to love the person. That love comes after marriage. The accumulating data says men are very happy in those relationships, but women grow increasingly distressed in them because they weren't married to be happy.
You know, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify that I'm actually not advocating for someone else to come along and choose your partner. But if we think about the kind of environment we want to live in that's going to get us to have a proper balance, we might want to change how primed that particular area is.
Also, when you talk about globalization, I feel concerned. If you study the environment, you know, one of the weaknesses of an invasive species is you've lost diversity there. Many cultures evolved over millennia. We have no idea what they offered, what their values are. For some reason, Western culture, and maybe it's something about the nucleus accumbens and how compelling it is sweeping across the world. What are we losing? What's being lost with the languages that are disappearing at this rate? I just feel that there's such a threat right now. I mean, I'm of the culture that seems to be sweeping everywhere. I certainly wouldn't want my father to pick out someone for me to have married. But I still am moved and concerned by what we're losing in this time without even having known its value.
Sure.
Two more questions.
Sorry. Trouble with standing up here for a long time is you think of all kinds of things. And so I'm not sure I remember my original question. Anyway, I'm Elaine Baruch. I wanted to get back to India for a moment. Not that two anecdotal examples mean anything, but when I was in graduate school at Radcliffe, there was an Indian girl in the in my dorm, and a very beautiful girl from Nepal who said in her culture she wasn't considered beautiful, she was too thin, etc., etc. Well, we wanted to fix her up, the beauty. She said, oh no, when I go home, my parents will find me a husband. And the other one, the one from India, had an arranged marriage, and she was very much in love with her husband, this arranged husband, and she would address her letters to him as the Lord of my temple, which I thought was rather poetic, rather sweet, and I don't think it was just conventional. I think she truly loved him. Now, what did I want to say to begin with? It had to do
Arranged marriages are good.
Well, I think they can be. They certainly couldn't be worse than some of the ones we have that aren't arranged. Not that I'm advocating that either. But, I can't remember what I was. I'm sorry. I'll only stand here a moment trying to recover. Yeah, the use of the word love and how it has not that it only has so many possible meanings, but also how it has been avoided or turned to. In the 19th century, people spoke about love. There was no shame in it. I would say the first half or more of the 20th century, the word was avoided like crazy, partly because scientifically it didn't seem to hold up. There were too many definitions. Lately, I find there is once again this emphasis on love with the ability to speak about it or the desire to speak about it, perhaps because people want it so much. So I was just wondering what you made of this historical difference And I think this keeps going back and forth, too. Last week we had a session on the biology of love. Was that the title of it? I don't
Biology of sexuality.
Pardon? Oh, okay. And the point was made there, which I certainly cannot agree with, but I'm not going to go into a whole big argument. It was Helen Fisher who said she thinks that romantic love always existed. 1,000,000 years ago it existed. Well, I simply cannot accept that. I mean, it's like saying that one could have written the symphonies of Beethoven centuries ago, or one had the potential to write it. There is the question of culture, cultural influences, and it's simply musical influences in Beethoven's case. And I think the term romantic love is constantly changing. But again, I'm back to my question, why is it is so avoided? The term love itself has been generally avoided, particularly in scientific circles.
You want to answer, or shall we go to the next question?
Yeah, I don't know why it's been avoided, really.
You were penalized for using it as granted.
Sure, but if I had to bet, I would say that there are some things that seem like in evolution, culture played the bigger part, like romantic love, sort of the real phony baloney romantic notions. I think those are easily changed. The deep-seated yearnings that you guys have talked about, so deep longings that you can hardly even talk about them, I bet they were there from the start. But the object might have changed.
Yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
the issue is even the study of emotion was not common within psychology until after 1960, probably mid-50s or 60. And
Yes.
the question is why? And it had to do with the operational definition so that you could do experiments. And science has broadened itself, and you have experimentalists, but experiments are not the only way you do science. Science is actually trying to understand processes through, basically it's how to understand the variance of a process. Basically there are different ways of doing science. You don't always have to do manipulations. At the turn of the century, we started to create a science of psychology which was basically modeled on physics. And so we started to study big effects. But there are other things going, underlying processes that were very difficult to study with those rules. And science is progressing that way.
I'm sorry, I must make a comment about the young woman who spoke about her attraction, her fascination, her love perhaps for this older man. One of the characteristics of romantic love, particularly romantic love outside of marriage, is its obstacles. When you can't have something, whether it's a generational prohibition or might be an adulterous prohibition, it seems to me that romantic love thrives, at least in the literature of love outside marriage.
Yeah, but that's French. That's Genevieve. Yeah, courtly love. Yeah.
One last question.
My name is Karen Rude. On the one hand, I heard that you were saying that anxiousness creates almost a desperation for attachment or increases the strength of attachment. Then on the other side, anxiety inhibits the ability. So is there a contradiction between
interferes with the ability to pick up certain features that enable you to determine whether the person is safe.
So it doesn't interfere with your desire for attachment?
But it may interfere with appropriate attachment.
Well, and in animals, actually, we've done experiments. If you do a deliberate stress before you put animals together to form a pair bond, males form the bonds more quickly and females more slowly. And in fact, females would go to other females instead of forming male-female bonds. So there's a big sex difference here. Again, another workshop, I think, on the nature of that amazing and emerging. That literature is just going crazy because we're now starting to see what that sex difference might be.
But there's a point of clarification here that if you're in a state of stress or anxiety, you will not read the features of the other person.
Yeah, which is different.
And yet you're saying that there'll be a greater difference.
I bet there's a difference between passionate love and companionate love. And my bet is companionate love, which is friendly feelings and reasonably calm sex and happiness, that's calmness contributes to that. Passionate love, I bet anything that makes it a total mess with fear and anxiety and yearning, and that contributes.
Yeah, but then you end up with the situation of, is that the type of person you want to be bonded to?
Yeah. And you want to stick around long enough to find out, do you go from passion to anything else?
Well, it depends on whether it's recreational or whether you're trying to create a pair bond.
Right. Right, but you can't really find out. People can't tell infatuation from true love till time has passed. If it falls apart, they say that was mere infatuation. If it sticks together, they say that was true love. But when you're in it, you always think it's true love and it will last forever, you know?
Did you get your question answered?
I'm not sure, because on the one hand, I'm hearing that that anxiety or anxiousness, are those identical or are they different?
No, for me they'd be in the same ballpark.
Is it propel you towards it, or does it diminish your ability to engage?
To get scientific, but basically anxiety almost always has what they call an inverted U. In other words, there's a sort of just right and there's too much. And that's a very individual construct. And so when you get too much, you're out there. You can't.
If you flip it into anxiety, to a physiological state of arousal, which is really what we're all talking about, is that at one limb it's a motivator, and when it goes to the other limb, you're just disorganized. I guess that would be the closest thing.
Matter of degree.
Right, a matter of degree.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philoctetes events is available at philoctetes.org.